Everyone thought she was just a quiet girl in the back row until the piano revealed the voice the world never knew it needed. It was a cold winter morning when the famous music conservatory in Vienna prepared for its annual solo performance auditions. The school was filled with talented students, each trained by the best teachers, each dreaming of the spotlight. The atmosphere inside the hall was serious. Some students warmed up on pianos, others practiced hand movements in the hallways. The sound of fast fingers hitting piano keys echoed throughout the building. Everyone knew that this was the chance to prove themselves. Only a few would be selected to perform at the upcoming concert, a major event that drew famous musicians from around the world. In one corner of the main hallway sat a girl who looked like she didn't belong there. Her name was Lena. She was 17, with long black hair that she usually kept tied in a simple braid. She wore old clothes that looked too plain for the elegant halls of the conservatory. She didn't talk to many people, didn't laugh or joke like the other students, and always sat at the back of the class. Most students didn't even remember when she joined. Some thought she was just part of the staff or an assistant. But Lena wasn't there by accident. She was a full-time student, although no one really knew much about her. She never played in front of others. In group piano classes, she listened more than she spoke. And when it was her turn to play, she quietly passed or made an excuse. Teachers thought she was just shy, while others assumed she wasn't serious. A few even questioned how she was accepted into the conservatory at all. After all, it wasn't an ordinary school. Students here were expected to be bold, competitive, and ready to perform at any moment. The one person everyone feared and respected the most in the conservatory was Madame Yelena, a former world-class pianist. Her fingers once danced on the grandest stages across Europe, and her recordings were studied by piano students for decades. Now retired from performing, she taught advanced students at the conservatory and served as the head judge for major selections. She was known for being harsh. If she didn't like your playing, she wouldn't sugarcoat it. If you were lazy, she wouldn't waste a second on you. But if she believed you had real talent, she could transform you into a star. Everyone wanted to impress her, but very few ever succeeded. When the list of students applying for solo auditions was posted, Madame Yelena's eyes scanned the paper with her usual sharp gaze. She recognized most of the names: bold, confident students who had performed many times before, but one name confused her. Lena Veselov. She frowned. "Who is this girl?" she asked one of her assistants. The assistant shrugged. "Quiet. Always at the back. Never really plays in class." Yelena's eyes narrowed, and she thinks she can audition for a solo. Later that day, Lena entered the main rehearsal room, where Yelena was sitting at the piano bench, reviewing music sheets. The room was grand, with high ceilings, golden walls, and a massive Steinway piano shining in the middle. Lena walked in slowly, her hands cold and her heart beating fast. She had almost talked herself out of it that morning, thinking maybe she wasn't ready, maybe this was a bad idea. But something inside her pushed her forward. Yelena didn't look up. "You're Lena?" "Yes," she said softly. "You want to audition?" "Yes, ma'am." Yelena finally looked at her. Her eyes were sharp, like they could read every thought Lena had. "Why now? You've never played a single note in class." I wanted to try," Lena said, almost in a whisper. Yelena stared at her for a moment, then gave a small, dry laugh. "Do you know what this is?" she asked, pulling out a music sheet from her pile. She held it up and walked over to Lena. Lena looked at it. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw the title, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3. Yelena's voice was cold. "This is one of the most difficult piano compositions in the world. Even concert pianists are terrified of it. But do you still want to audition?" Lena hesitated. "Yes." Yelena held out the sheet. "Fine, play this. Come back when you can." Lena took the paper with both hands. She bowed slightly and turned to leave. Yelena shook her head as she watched her go. She'd never come back. Yelena muttered to herself. Word spread quickly through the school. Lena, the silent girl from the back of the room, was trying to audition. Not just that, she was going to play the most insane piece anyone had ever attempted in auditions. Some students laughed. Some shook their heads. "She must be crazy," one said. "She's going to embarrass herself," another added. A few were even angry. Why is she wasting Madame Yelena's time? But Lena didn't listen to the whispers. That night, she stayed alone in the smallest practice room in the basement, a cold space with an old upright piano. It was out of tune and had a few chipped keys, but it was the only room where she could be alone. She put the sheet music in front of her and stared at it. It was like looking at a storm of black ink, notes flying everywhere. Rhythms that twisted and turned, patterns that changed without warning. But Lena didn't panic. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and placed her fingers gently on the keys. What no one knew was that Lena had been playing piano since she was 4 years old. She had never had a proper teacher. Her family couldn't afford lessons. Her mother had found an old keyboard in a second-hand shop, and that became her best friend. Every day after school, she would play by ear, teaching herself by listening to music on the radio or on a small MP3 player she carried. While other kids played outside, Lena played scales. While others watched TV, Lena studied YouTube videos. A pianist had memorized their finger movements. She didn't perform in public because she was never asked. She didn't speak up in class because she didn't think anyone would care. But now, holding that piece of music in her hands, she felt something shift inside her. Not fear, but determination. Madame Yelena may have given her the piece as a punishment, but Lena saw it as a test. A hard one, maybe even impossible, but she was going to try. For the next 3 weeks, Lena practiced like her life depended on it. She came in early and stayed late. She memorized the pages one by one, playing small sections again and again until her fingers moved without thought. She studied old recordings of Rachmaninoff himself, listened to his rhythm, his expression, the way he let the notes breathe. She learned not just the notes, but the emotion inside the music. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing. She kept quiet as always. But slowly something changed. One student passing by the basement practice rooms paused when he heard someone playing. The piece was too complex, too beautiful. He peeked inside, expecting to see a teacher or visiting artist. Instead, he saw Lena, alone, focused, lost in the music. He didn't say anything, just quietly walked away, unsure of what he had just witnessed. And so the days passed. The audition list remained on the board, with Lena's name still there. Some students thought she had backed out, others forgot entirely. But one day a quiet buzz returned to the school. Lena had requested a performance slot. A private one, just Madame Yelena and a few selected faculty members. No audience, no applause, just the music. Madame Yelena was surprised when she heard, "She's really going to play it?" she asked her assistant. "Yes, she says she's..." "Ready?" Yelena raised an eyebrow. "We'll see." And just like that, the date was set. The piano room was prepared. A few top students were invited to sit in the back as silent observers. The lights were dim. The large grand piano gleamed under the warm glow of the stage light. The air was tense. Everyone expected Lena to fail. Even those who wanted to support her didn't believe she could actually pull it off. But somewhere deep inside, something told Madame Yelena not to cancel it. Not yet. She waited at the front of the room, holding her pen, ready to write down her comments. The door opened, and Lena walked in. Her hands were cold. Her heart was loud. But her face was calm. She walked straight to the piano, placed the sheet, music on the stand, even though she didn't need it anymore, and sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys. The room held its breath, and then she began to play. Lena's hands touched the cold piano keys as the room remained silent. She took a deep breath. Her eyes didn't scan the sheet music. She had already memorized it. Every note, every pause, every change in tempo was already burned into her mind. She had spent the last 3 weeks living inside this piece, feeling it with her whole body. And now, in front of Madame Yelena, her time had come. When she played the first few notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, even those who had been waiting to see her fail, were forced to sit up straight. The sound was rich, deep, and full of emotion. The piece started gently with a flowing melody, but it wasn't long before it moved into tricky rhythms and intense, fast movements that made most pianists nervous. But Lena didn't look nervous. She didn't look at the people watching her. She didn't even blink much. She just moved with the music. Her fingers glided over the keys with confidence and grace. The softness in the quiet parts, the thunder in the louder sections, it all came from inside her. She wasn't just playing the piece, she was living it. Madame Yelena sat silently. In her chair, her pen hovered above the paper, but she didn't write a single word. She didn't expect this. She had given the hardest piece she could find to scare Lena away. It was her way of testing whether the girl was serious or just wasting time, but this was something different. Yelena studied Lena's posture, her expression, the way she moved. There was no fear, no hesitation, only complete focus and emotion. For someone who had never performed in class, Lena looked like she belonged on a world stage. Other students in the room whispered to each other, stunned. How? How is she doing this? One said under their breath. I can't even play the first page of that piece without making mistakes, another muttered. Even the assistant teachers at the back of the room were frozen. This wasn't normal. This wasn't what anyone expected from a quiet girl who sat in the back row. But what they didn't know was that Lena had been preparing for a moment like this her whole life, not in public, did in silence. She had no teacher to guide her, no expensive instruments at home, no encouragement from famous mentors. What she had was passion and patience. For years, she trained herself to hear details in music that most people missed. She didn't just study notes. She listened to the emotions behind them. She didn't just learn to play fast. She learned to make every note meaningful. And now, with the hardest piece in the world under her fingers, she was finally able to speak, not with words, but with music. As she played, her mind didn't wander. She wasn't thinking about the people watching her. She wasn't worrying about what Yelena would say. She was thinking about the music, how it rose like a wave, and then fell softly like rain. She thought about the hidden sadness in the melody, the quiet hope in the harmonies, the way the composer had poured his heart into every line. To her, this was more than just music. It was a story of struggle, of beauty, of pain and peace. And she wanted everyone in the room to feel it. Halfway through the performance, the piece became faster and more complicated. Most students wouldn't dare touch this section. The timing was wild. The jumps between notes were large, and there were rapid changes in dynamics that could easily throw someone off. But Lena didn't flinch. Her fingers danced faster than anyone thought possible. Her hands moved up and down the keyboard, crossing over each other with ease. She hit every note perfectly, even the tiny ones hidden between loud bursts. It was as if she wasn't just playing with her fingers, she was using her whole body. Her soul. Madame Yelena's eyes followed every movement. This wasn't beginner-level skill. This wasn't even average student-level talent. This was something rare, something special. And she had almost dismissed this girl without giving her a chance. Yelena remembered her own training years ago. How she had cried while practicing this same concerto. How she had spent sleepless nights trying to master it. Even as a top pianist, she had struggled with this piece. But Lena was doing it with grace. There was a moment in the piece that called for total silence. A break between two stormy sections. Lena paused, her hands frozen in the air, the room completely still. And in that pause, everyone could feel it. Their hearts beating louder, their breath held in. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of tension, like the calm before a storm. And then Lena began again, diving into the final section with everything she had. It was loud, it was fast, it was powerful. Her hands blurred as they raced over the keys. Her expression changed. More serious, more intense. She hit each note like it mattered more than the last. She leaned into the keys, pouring all her strength into the music by now. The people in the room had forgotten that she was just a student. They had forgotten that they were supposed to judge her. They weren't teachers or classmates anymore. They were an audience, caught in the spell of her playing. When she finally hit the last note, the sound rang across the hall like a final word. And then, complete silence. No one clapped. No one spoke. Even the air felt still. Lena sat frozen for a second, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, her breathing calm but deep. Then she slowly lowered her hands and looked up. Yelena didn't move. She sat, eyes wide, her pen still untouched. Her expression had changed. It wasn't angry or strict or even surprised anymore. It was shaken. She tried to speak, but no. Words came. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Who taught you this?" Lena answered softly, "No one." Yelena blinked. "No one." Lena nodded. "I watched videos. I listened. I practiced alone." There was another pause. "You mean to say," Yelena said slowly, "you learned this piece on your own?" Nodded again. One of the assistant teachers at the back finally broke the silence. "That was extraordinary," another added. "I've never seen anything like it." The students in the room, still in shock, began to understand what they had just witnessed. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a one-time miracle. Lena had talent, but more than that, she had discipline, dedication, and something rare, true connection to the music. Yelena stood up slowly, walking toward the piano. She looked down at Lena, who now seemed smaller, tired, almost fragile. But in Yelena's eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in years. Raw. Real talent that hadn't been shaped or polished, but was already beautiful. She placed a hand gently on Lena's shoulder. "You have a gift," she said, "and I nearly missed it." Lena didn't smile. She just lowered her eyes. Yelena continued, "From this day forward, I will be your mentor. You deserve to be heard." There was a small smile on Lena's lips. Now, not because she had been praised, but because, for the first time, someone saw her, not just as a quiet girl in the back row, but as an artist. Word of Lena's performance spread through the school like fire. Students who had laughed at her now stood in awe. Teachers began asking her questions. Pianists from other schools started looking her up. Some didn't believe the story until they watched the security footage from the room which captured her entire performance. It was more than just a solo audition now. It was a turning point, but for Lena, it wasn't about fame. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about the music, about how it had been her voice when she had no words, her strength when she felt weak, her light when she lived in shadows. She had been forced to play the hardest piece, a challenge meant to crush her spirit. But instead, she had risen, and those who thought they knew everything about talent were left frozen by the power of what they heard. The morning after Lena's performance, the entire conservatory felt different. Something had changed. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was there in the way people walked, in the way they spoke about music, and especially in the way they now looked at Lena. Just a day before, she had been invisible, the quiet girl sitting in corners, barely noticed by teachers or students. But now, wherever she walked, heads turned. Students who had never spoken to her suddenly wanted to talk. Some smiled shyly when they passed her in the hall. Others asked questions like, "How did you learn to play like that? Or do you?" Give lessons. Few even tried to hide their jealousy behind forced compliments. But Lena didn't change. She still walked slowly, eyes down, wearing the same plain clothes. She didn't care for attention. All she wanted was to keep playing Madame Yelena, however. It changed completely in how she viewed Lena. She called her into her office the next day, a grand room with walls full of framed awards and photos of her performing on giant stages. Lena sat quietly across from her. Yelena stared at her for a long time, then said, "You surprise me?" Lena just nodded. "Thank you." "No," Yelena said. "You don't understand. I've seen hundreds of pianists, some very talented, some very hard-working, but what I saw in you, that was different. That was not normal talent." Lena didn't know what to say. She was not used to praise. For so many years she had played alone, unnoticed. Now, one of the greatest pianists in the country was speaking to her like she was something rare. "I want to work with you personally," Yelena continued. "Train you myself. If you agree, we start today." Lena blinked. "Well, me," Yelena smiled. "Slightly yes, if you want it." Of course, Lena agreed. Not because she wanted to be famous, but because she wanted to learn more. She wanted to improve. She knew she had taught herself a lot, but she also knew there were many things she didn't know. And now, with someone like Yelena guiding her, she could grow faster than ever. Their lessons started the same day. At first, Lena was nervous. Yelena was known for her tough methods, her strict rules, her harsh feedback, but what surprised Lena was how patient she was. Yelena didn't shout or scold. She corrected Lena with quiet words and showed her small details that changed everything: how to hold her wrist differently, how to shape a phrase so the emotion came through more clearly. "You already play with your heart," Yelena told her, "but now I'll help you play with both your heart and your mind." Their lessons were intense. 2 hours a day, sometimes more. Yelena pushed Lena in new ways, giving her new pieces, harder than before, asking her to compose small sections of her own and making her explain why she made certain musical choices. "Don't just play what's written," she'd say. "Play what the composer felt, and add what you feel." At first, Lena struggled with this. She had never thought much about her own musical opinions. She had always just listened, copied, practiced. But now she was being asked to interpret, to create, to think. Slowly, she began to grow more confident, not in a loud or arrogant way, but in a quiet, steady way. Outside of the lessons, rumors about her performance continued to spread. Someone had recorded part of her audition on their phone, and though it wasn't allowed, the video made its way to the internet. Within a few days, it had thousands of views, then tens of thousands. Famous pianists started sharing it, calling her a hidden genius and the next big star. Interviews were requested, offers came from different parts of Europe, and people who had never heard of the conservatory were now talking about it. Lena, however, didn't care much for the attention. She refused most interviews and ignored the online comments. She didn't even tell her parents what was happening. All she cared about was music and practicing. Every morning, before most students arrived, she was already at the piano. Every night, when others had gone home, she was still in the practice room, perfecting small sections for the next day's lesson. Meanwhile, students at the school reacted in different ways. Some admired her. They said things like, "She deserves it. She worked for it." Others felt bitter. "She just got lucky," some whispered. "Yelena is giving her special treatment," others said. A few even tried to copy her style, hoping to get the same attention. But no one could match her. Because what Lena had wasn't just talent, it was obsession. She didn't just like playing piano. She needed it. It was the one place where she felt alive, free, and in control. She didn't care about medals or applause. She just wanted to become better, deeper, more connected to the music. One evening, after a long lesson, Yelena sat beside her on the bench and asked, "Lena, why did you decide to play that Rachmaninoff piece?" Most students would have walked away. Lena thought for a moment, then said, "Because you gave it to me." Yelena smiled, but Lena continued, "And because I wanted to see if I could do something impossible. You did more than that." Yelena replied, "You made it your own." After a few weeks, something even bigger happened. The conservatory director came to Yelena with an offer, a major international piano. Competition was opening a slot for a new rising artist. They had seen Lena's video and wanted her to compete. "She's not ready," Yelena said at first. "She's just begun formal training," but the director disagreed. "She's not a beginner. You saw it yourself." Yelena spoke to Lena about it. At first, Lena hesitated. Competition scared her. She didn't like the idea of being judged, of being compared. But Yelena encouraged her. "This isn't about beating others. It's about showing the world who you are." Lena agreed, and so, the next chapter of her journey began. She started preparing a full program, 3 pieces from different styles and time periods, each more challenging than the last. It was a lot of work. Sometimes she doubted herself. had never even been on a real stage before. She had no experience performing under pressure, but Yelena stayed by her side, guiding her through every step. The other students watched with mixed emotions. Some wished her well, others were jealous, but Lena ignored all of it. She focused only on her music. Weeks passed. Then the day of the competition arrived. It was held in Berlin, in a huge concert hall filled with hundreds of people. Famous judges sat in the front row. Cameras were everywhere. The pressure was heavy. Most of the other competitors were older, dressed in expensive clothes, and backed by well-known teachers. Lena arrived with just a small bag, her hair tied back as always, and Yelena beside her like a quiet guardian. Backstage, some competitors laughed when they saw her. "She's the one from the video," someone said. "She looks like a school kid." But when her name was called and she walked onto the stage, the laughter stopped. She sat at the piano, the lights above her, the crowd silent, and then she began to play. The same calm took over her, the same focus, same emotion. She played a Beethoven sonata first, full of power and clarity. Then a French impressionist piece, light and dreamy, like colors floating in the air. And finally a modern composition filled with tension and speed. By the end, the hall was completely still, and then came the applause. Long, loud, and rising. Judges stood up. People in the audience wiped tears from their eyes. No one could believe that a girl with no stage experience, no training history, and no big name behind her had just given one of the best performances of the night. Backstage, no one laughed. Now, after the results were announced, Lena didn't win first place. She didn't even place in the top 3. Some said it was politics. Others said the judges didn't know what to do with someone like her. But it didn't matter, because the audience remembered her. The critics wrote about her, and offers began to pour in from music schools, orchestras, even record labels. Back in Vienna, when she returned to the conservatory, students welcomed her like a hero. Even the jealous ones had to admit it now. She was the real deal, but Lena didn't let it go to her head. The next morning, she was back in her usual practice room, the old one in the basement, playing the same scales she had played since childhood. Yelena found her there and asked, "You just returned from one of the biggest stages in Europe. Why are you here in this old room?" Lena looked up and smiled softly, "'Cause this is where it started." And then she continued playing, her fingers dancing on the keys, the music flowing from her heart like it always had, from silence, from stillness, from a quiet girl no one had noticed, till now. The lights in the conservatory's large practice hall were dimmed. The big windows reflected the warm evening sun, and dust floated gently in the golden light. Lena sat quietly at the grand piano in the center of the room, her fingers resting softly on the keys. Around her, the space was silent, filled with a kind of tension that felt too heavy to be ordinary. She was preparing to play once again, but this time it wasn't a test or a private audition. It was a rehearsal for something much bigger. She had just returned from the Berlin competition. Even though she hadn't placed, her name was everywhere now. Videos of her performance were being shared online by musicians, music critics, and fans. People didn't care about the rankings. They cared about what they felt when she played. And what they felt was something powerful. But for Lena, everything still felt the same. She still wore the same comfortable clothes, still tied her hair in a braid, still chose the smallest practice rooms over the fancy studios. She still spoke only when necessary. Her world was the music, and that world hadn't changed at all now. The conservatory had decided to give her a special honor, a solo performance at the end of year gala. This was a concert attended by the country's best musicians, critics, and donors. Only the finest students performed there, and Madame Yelena had personally announced that Lena would headline it. Some people were excited. Others still whispered their doubts. "She's never played for a big crowd alone," a violin student said one day. "She doesn't even smile on stage. I bet she freezes this time," another muttered. "She's not used to the pressure." But Lena ignored the noise. All she focused on was preparing for the performance. Yelena had helped her choose the program, a mix of 3 pieces. The first was a romantic Chopin nocturne. The second was a dramatic and emotional piece by Liszt. The final one was her own arrangement of a modern melody that she had turned into a classical piano solo, something personal, something bold. Each piece showed a different side of her. One soft and emotional, one fierce and technical, one uniquely hers. Every day for weeks she practiced until late at night. She worked on every note, every pause, every rise and fall of sound. She didn't want to just perform, she wanted to make people feel something again. But as the concert date came closer, she started feeling something unusual, something she had never felt before. Fear. Not fear of the music. Not fear of mistakes. Fear of failing the people who now believed in her. For so long, Lena had been invisible. She had no pressure. No one expected anything from her. But now everyone was watching. Everyone expected something great. And she had no idea if she could give it to them again. One evening, after a long practice session, she sat alone in the conservatory garden. The sky was turning dark, and a cold wind blew through the trees. Madame Yelena came and sat beside her. "You're quiet," Yelena said, even though Lena was always quiet. Lena hesitated before replying, "I don't know if I can do this again." "Do what?" "Move people, like I did the first time." "If they expect something more than I can give?" Yelena looked at her for a moment, then smiled gently. "That's not how music works, Lena. You're not supposed to give them what they expect. You're supposed to give them what you feel. That's why they listened to you in the first place." Lena looked down. "But what if it's not enough?" This time, Yelena reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't owe them perfection. You just owe them honesty. Will always be enough." Those words stayed with Lena. The night of the concert arrived. The conservatory hall was packed with guests. Famous pianists, orchestra conductors, journalists, and even sponsors of international music competitions sat in the front rows. The lights were bright, the stage polished, the piano tuned to perfection. Everything was ready. Backstage, Lena stood. In the dark with her eyes closed, her hands were cold, her stomach was tight. But her face stayed calm. Madame Yelena stood behind her, dressed in a formal black gown. She leaned close and whispered, "They've never heard anything like you before. Just give them what's inside you." Then the announcer walked on stage and spoke into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our featured pianist this evening, Lena Vasilov." The audience clapped, not loudly, not with excitement, more with curiosity. A few people in the back whispered, "That's the girl from the video. She looks so young. She looks like she's going to faint." But Lena walked onto the stage slowly and confidently. She wore a simple black dress, her long braid resting over her shoulder. She didn't bow deeply or smile for the crowd. She just walked to the piano and sat. Down the lights dimmed, the room fell silent, and she began to play. The first notes of Chopin filled the hall like whispers, soft, delicate, emotional. Her fingers moved gently, touching the keys as if they were made of glass. The melody rose and fell like a quiet voice, telling a story no one had ever heard before. People stopped whispering. They leaned forward. The noise of thoughts and judgments slowly faded away. She moved into the middle section, letting the music grow, then fall again, like breathing. When she finished the final note of the nocturne, the hall was completely still. No one moved. No one clapped yet then, just as the silence started to feel too heavy. She raised her hands again. The next piece started. Liszt's composition hit the room like thunder. Allah. Fast, sharp, dramatic. Her fingers moved like fire across the keyboard. Her body swayed with the rhythm, her hands flying over octaves and jumps that would terrify even professionals. Her face didn't change. She wasn't showing off. She wasn't performing for the crowd. She was just inside the music, shriding the storm, shaping the chaos, but making every impossible part sound clean and meaningful. The hall was frozen. Even the critics had stopped taking notes. When she reached the end of the second piece, her fingers hit the final crashing chord with so much power. It echoed through the room like lightning, but she didn't wait for applause. She turned the page and began the last piece. This one was her own. A simple, haunting melody. Something that didn't belong to any famous composer. Something that started soft and slowly grew. She had built it herself, inspired by the sounds she had grown up with, melodies from old radio stations, fragments of lullabies, memories of her mother humming while knitting. She played it with the most feeling of all. Not because it was hard, but because it was hers. And in those few minutes, something happened that no one expected. People cried, real tears, quiet ones, gentle ones. Not because the music was sad, but because it was real, because they could feel her in it, her silence, her struggle, her beauty. When she played the final note, she didn't move. She let it ring. She let the silence follow. She let the room breathe. And only then did she stand. Up slowly, still no applause, until it began. One person stood and clapped, then another, then a wave of hands clapping, rising louder and louder. Then all at once a standing ovation. People didn't cheer. They didn't scream, just clapped with full hearts, full respect, full silence in their minds. Yelena stood too, with quiet tears in her eyes. Later that night, people would write about what happened. They would say things like a soul spoke through the piano, or a new light in the music world has arrived. They would call her the girl who didn't speak, but made the world listen. But Lena didn't hear any of it. Backstage, after the performance, she sat down on the cold floor and took off her shoes. Her hands were still shaking. But in her heart, she felt peace. Yelena came to her and said nothing. She didn't need to. She just sat beside her. They didn't talk. They didn't need to, because music had said everything. And for the first time in her life, Lena felt like the world had finally heard her. Not because of fame, not because of attention, but because of truth. And in that moment, everything was enough. After the concert ended, the audience slowly began to leave the grand hall, but their hearts stayed full. Conversations were quiet, almost respectful, as if people were still holding on to the feeling they had experienced during Lena's performance. Some talked about her music, others spoke about her calm expression and how she never once looked afraid on stage. Most of them didn't know much about her background. They didn't know how she had learned piano in silence, how she had never been trained by famous teachers until just recently, or how she had once sat in the back of the classroom like a ghost. But now, no one could forget her. She had stepped onto that stage as a mystery, and walked off as something unforgettable. Backstage, Lena sat alone on a wooden bench near the dressing room. The noise of footsteps and chatter echoed behind her, but she stayed. Still, her eyes lowered, her breathing quiet. She wasn't sure what to feel. There was no joy, no nervousness, just a strange calmness, like the end of a long dream. She didn't check her phone. She didn't ask anyone what people thought of her. For her, the performance had already passed. And now her mind had returned to silence. Madame Yelena entered the room carrying 2 cups of tea. She handed one to Lena and sat beside her. They didn't say anything for a long time. The soft sound of tea being sipped was the only thing between them. Then Yelena finally said, "You were right." Lena turned to her. Yelena continued, "I gave you that piece Rachmaninoff, thinking it would scare you. I thought it would push you to your limit, maybe make you give up. But instead, it brought you here." Lena didn't reply. She just nodded. Slowly. "And you didn't only survive," Yelena said. "You transformed." Lena whispered, "I just played what I felt. That's exactly why it worked." That night, something else happened, something Lena didn't expect. A letter arrived from a world-famous music foundation in Paris. They had seen a recording of her gala performance and wanted to offer her a full scholarship for their elite mentorship program. It was a rare opportunity, one that only a few young musicians in the world ever received. The letter also included invitations for multiple European concerts, collaborations with symphony orchestras, and even an offer to record her first solo album. Yelena read the letter aloud, then looked at Lena and said, "This is what most students dream of." But Lena didn't look excited or shocked. She looked thoughtful. She asked, "What happens if I say no?" Yelena tilted her head, "Then nothing changes. You stay here, we continue our lessons, you play music as always. Lena was quiet again. I don't want to lose why I started playing. I never played to be famous. Yelena smiled gently. And that's why they want you. You're not like the others. You play because you have to. Not for the stage, not for applause, but because it's your voice. Your only way to speak. Lena thought about it deeply, and eventually, she accepted the offer, but on her own terms. She agreed to travel and perform, but she refused all interviews. She said no to television shows and commercial promotions. She made it clear her music would speak, not her image. She wouldn't be shaped by trends or public demands. The music world was surprised. Many young stars were hungry for attention, eager to be on posters, to have their names in bright lights. But Lena stayed in the background, letting her playing. Do the work. Her first concert after the scholarship was in Paris. The theater was packed. Music critics filled the seats, famous teachers sat in the front row, and hundreds of students came just to watch this new pianist who had taken the world by storm. When she walked onto the stage, the audience stared in silence. There were no loud cheers, no wild applause, just a deep quiet, as if they all understood they were about to hear something rare. Lena sat at the piano, placed her hands gently on the keys, and played, and the same magic returned, even across countries. Across languages, across cultures, people felt it. The honesty, beauty, the stillness between the notes, the quiet pain and the quiet strength. Her music was like looking through a window into a soul that had never tried to impress anyone, but only wanted to be heard, to be understood. She toured across Europe for several months. Each performance was sold out. She was invited to music academies, given standing ovations, offered awards. But she turned many of those things down. If a place didn't allow her to rehearse in peace, or forced her to follow strict stage instructions that felt fake to her, she refused to play. And people respected her more for it. Back at the conservatory in Vienna, her story had become something legendary. Students who once ignored her now studied her videos like they were textbooks. Teachers used her journey to inspire their classes. She wasn't just a girl anymore. She was proof that true talent didn't need approval. That greatness could come from silence, that sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that take the longest to speak. And still, Lena remained the same. Quiet, focused, honest. Months later, Yelena visited her at her small apartment in Paris. It wasn't fancy, just a room with a piano, a bookshelf, and a window facing a quiet street. Lena welcomed her in, made tea, and played a soft melody she had written herself. Yelena asked, "Do you feel different now?" Lena shook her head. "Not really. Just more people are listening." Yelena smiled. "Do you miss Vienna?" "Sometimes," Lena said, "especially the old practice room in the basement." I kept it empty," Yelena said. "No one else uses it. It's still yours." That made Lena smile. She looked out the window and said, "I want to return there, not forever, just for a while. I want to play again in silence. No cameras, no crowd, just the keys and the room." Yelena nodded. "Then come." And Lena did. She returned months later, quietly, without telling many people. She walked into the conservatory like she had on her first day, wearing a plain coat, her braid over her shoulder, her eyes calm. Some students didn't recognize her. Others stared in disbelief. But she didn't stop to explain. She went straight to the basement, to the old practice room, opened the door, and smiled. Nothing had changed. The same worn-out piano, the same cracked stool, the same faint smell of dust and wood. She sat down and began to play. The sound was soft, not grand or showy, just honest. And as the music flowed, she felt like herself again, not the rising star, not the concert pianist, not the girl who had made headlines, but the little child who once listened to old songs on a broken keyboard, trying to make sense of the world with sound, and that was more than enough. In the end, Lena didn't need the crowd, the lights, or the stage. All she ever needed was music, because through music she wasn't silent anymore. she was free.